Welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Ruzicka.
And I'm Andres Lorente. And on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch two films for you. One old, one new. And we try to make connections between the two.
It rhymes.
Yeah, lots of rhymes. We're also poets here.
You actually prepared that. That's awesome.
I did.
As usual, we'll quickly do the show socials at the top. So you can find us on Twitter at Two Real Cine Club at twitter.com. We're on Instagram, Two Real Cinema Club at instagram.com. We have a blog at tworealcinemaclub.com where we write various guff. You can email us at at tworealcinemaclub@gmail. And then tell your friends, spread the word. We'd appreciate it. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever else you get your podcasts, and we put them up on YouTube as well. So there's no excuse. There's no excuse. I had a patient this week who told me, you've got a great voice for radio. He told me, which was, and I wasn't sure whether he was trying to be flattering or whether he was telling me I was ugly. And it was only some hours later on that I realised the reason he said that was because I was listening to music through headphones when he was addressing me, and only listened to his comments in between the records. So that must have been why it was. So this episode we have got this episode we have literally watched the same film twice in a very real way. Do you think?
Between Moonage Daydream and The Man Who Fell to Earth?
Because the first film contains footage from the second.
Good point. Yeah, and we will talk about that.
Yeah, we have literally watched 1.5 David Bowie films back to back. One has copied a lot of scenes from the other. So two David Bowie films back to back.
First of all, it's nice that your patient didn't say that you have a face for radio. Isn't that the insult one? That you have a face for radio.
Yeah, that would have been true as well.
Yeah, and I just need to apologize to all those people out there sending us email because by my fault, we got locked out of the email for a couple of weeks. And Jimmy should really do all the social stuff because I am an immigrant. A digital immigrant is what I am when it comes to all that stuff. So apologies to that one email that we didn't get to, but we found it. We'll respond.
Damn you, Google, and your cybersecurity.
I know. God, too much security. Too many passwords in my brain. Moonage Daydream and The Man Who Fell to Earth. Yeah, so I guess the connective tissue here is the great David Bowie.
The late David Bowie.
The late great David Bowie, exactly. And yeah, I did feel like I saw the same film twice in many ways because I saw Moonage Daydream first. And I said, oh boy, that's footage from Man Who Fell to Earth. And then a couple minutes later, I said, oh, that's footage from The Man Who Fell to Earth. And then kind of the nature of the film, which we'll talk about, does mean that you really do feel like you saw both films. But I had seen The Man Who Fell to Earth, I think I saw it years ago. But when I actually watched the whole film, I realized I don't think I'd ever seen the whole film. So they were both new to me. The new one is 2022. It's directed by Brett Morgan, who directed The Kid Stays in the Picture. It's the documentary about the great producer Robert Evans.
Did you see that? Have you seen that?
I haven't, so I was going to ask you, have you seen that?
I have seen it. I read the book as well, actually. Okay. I read the book first and then saw the movie, and the movie just kind of siphons off a bunch of interviews from the book, I think.
Okay.
And it's going to be, and it's entertaining, but it feels like it's only 2 steps away from an audio book.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Well, this is not 2 steps away from an audiobook.
So it is kind of 2 steps away from a concert movie, I suppose.
It's definitely 2 steps away, I think, from a full concert movie. It even says it's not a film. It's a cinematic experience. I saw that in one trailer. It's been called a cinematic odyssey, and it's also been called a film by Brett Morgan. So, and I was mentioning to you before we started recording that it's going to be, I think you and I are probably going to have a more open conversation on this than normally we do when we sort of run down the plot points of the film, because it's, it's not a film. It's a cinematic experience.
There's no plot points. Yeah, there's no plot points.
I did hear an interview with Brett Morgan on National Public Radio here, and I think it's worth noting that he said in that interview, I won't make another music documentary. Okay. And he was, I think the origins of it, he was sort of pent up during COVID, and he was making the film totally in isolation. He was alone. He must have some sort of home studio or editing bay or something like that. The irony came to me that, here's this man completely holed up in one room working on a documentary about this other guy who's just moving all over the world quite freely. He's doing all sorts of things himself and exploring his own character and his own personality. And this guy it must have just driven him crazy to be watching David Bowie again and again being fantastic, and being in Indonesia and being in the Western United States and England and Germany.
Just being out of doors, frankly, yes.
Yeah, so he was constantly out about, and it really captures his life, David Bowie's life, pretty well. But Brett Morgan apparently did have a hard time just doing it on his own. So it does, and I'm going to compare it to another film a little bit later on, but it does strike me that it seems like this is just this one guy cooped up making a film. You kind of get that feeling in the movie theater. So I'm glad I heard that interview beforehand. And I think in the process, like, Brett Morgan seems to learn a lot from Bowie, as we do as the viewers of the film, like on how to live. It's almost like David Bowie's, I don't know, book or a guide to how to live a great, fantastic, super artistic, super famous life.
Is it a how-to, or is it just a I did?
Yeah, it's probably an I did, yeah. But an example that you'd want to follow. I mean, who would not want to be David Bowie after seeing this film? It's pretty intense. Starts out very spacey, doesn't it, and planetary, and it sort of sets up Bowie as being some sort of alien. I think you start to see images of maybe the moon and the universe, and then all of a sudden you see him sort of
It's like a picture of a lunar eclipse, isn't it? And
yeah.
He keeps coming back to this image. He keeps replaying it. It comes back again and again.
He repeats a lot of images, and that's why this film is over 2 hours. I forget the exact one. I think it was over 2 hours and 7 minutes or something like that. And it seems like there's so much repeating material that it sort of extends the film a little bit longer than it's welcome, I think. But it sort of starts with the whole, it looked like the Ziggy Stardust phase, or certainly his sort of androgynous phase, and the glam rock. So it sort of paints him as being this really weird dude, at least early in his career. There's a lot of, I don't know if it's bisexuality that's juxtaposed with masculinity, or some sort of or non-binary Bowie in the early going. And I think that, again and again, the themes that come out, and I think I'm probably going to talk a lot more about themes and filmmaking and such, but like individualism is really what's important to Bowie. And because he has all these different personalities that he had, it's the Ziggy Stardust or the Thin White Duke, or various Bowies, that almost even multiple individualism, if that makes any sense. That he wants to explore his own personas, however that many there may be. He wants to be different artists, and we definitely see that throughout the film.
It's kind of largely chronological, isn't it? Because it starts out with these kind of like early 70s performances, and then it goes through his his kind of Berlin phase, and then it kind of goes to the 80s, and then he kind of and then you get like a little bit of his kind of like sort of 90s and 2000s persona. So it sort of goes through. It does try and tell a bit of a chronological story, but it feels like it's very front loaded. And the Bowie that the film is most interested in is that Bowie from like 1970 to 1982, something like that.
Yeah, at latest. Yeah, maybe even like 76 or 77. It's
right. Okay. Yeah. And I did find those early live performances, which apparently are the bits of footage which haven't been seen before.
Yeah.
I did find those really electrifying. There are some fantastic early stage performances.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it that's been kind of shot from the mosh pit, and there's an uncomfortable amount of the camera staring straight up at David Bowie's crotch while he sings. Yeah, it would occasionally make me think, could be a bit discreet and pan away for a moment. Come on, but I did really enjoy those performances.
Yeah,
though for me, I thought the film peaked a bit early with those performances, and I didn't find the remaining 2/3 of the film quite as interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, those aren't the Bowie songs that I like as much. That's not musically. I'm not interested in that phase nearly as much, but the performance, because this is the early 70s. I don't think the world had ever seen stuff like that before. Yeah. So I think as performances, they're magnificent. The music, I don't think is his strongest music, and certainly not his strongest lyrics. So for me, I wanted to see more. Even like an origin story a little bit more. I mean, we do get into his childhood. We'll talk about that a little bit. But there were some teen years and some like the early musical stuff I thought was kind of sort of just glossed over. And then the end of his career, he had a couple more albums into the 2000s, and I think he released an album 2 days before he died or something like that. I mean, so he there's other music out there that Brett Morgan didn't pay any attention to whatsoever. So I think you're right. It's front loaded. He really wanted to explore the spacey part, and I think to the detriment of covering a lot more of Bowie's career.
Although, maybe for us, this is some of the most interesting footage, I do end up feeling like a lot of the film ends up looking a little bit like a bit of a whitewash. I did come away from the end of the film thinking, well, wait a second, where is Angie, who is David Bowie's first wife?
First wife, yeah.
Who he was married to from 1970 to 1980, who doesn't get a mention. There's a section towards the end of the film where he meets Iman, and you get a whole bunch of quotes about him saying how fantastic it is to be in love, and I never thought I'd be married, and here I am, sort of happy meeting somebody at this age. Where his first wife doesn't appear at all, and his son Duncan Jones,
yeah,
also doesn't appear.
I don't think he was mentioned. Yeah,
no, exactly, rendered utterly invisible.
Yeah,
it does feel like a little bit of a sort of a whitewash there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I must say, I came away from the film feeling that I'd seen a lot of Bowie personas, but hadn't had that much of a convincing glimpse of a real David Bowie.
Precisely, yeah.
Which I'm guessing, maybe that's what he would have wanted. The film was made with the cooperation of the David Bowie estate, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised that it's largely hagiography. But I was expecting there to be, a little bit more of an unsettling revelation, or a bit of a surprise. In a way, I tell you what this film really reminded me of. I was trying to describe it to a friend, and I was saying it's like, imagine that you had an uncle who really loved David Bowie, and this is back in the days when people would have like VHS television recorders, like a VHS recorder, and so your uncle, we'll call him Kevin, would always record David Bowie when he was on the telly. You think, there's an interview with David Bowie tonight, I'll record that. And sometimes he would miss the beginning because he wasn't very good at the time. He'd record a bit of it, and then a bit of The Man Who Fell to Earth is on. I'll record that. And so Kevin records a bit of that. And then there's some, concert footage. And then there's an appearance on Top of the Pops. And then there's a Pepsi advert with Tina Turner, and all these little bits of snippets.
Yeah.
Kevin just records. And then after all these years, he's filled up the VHS tape, and he invites his friends around who also like David Bowie. They open a couple of beers and they just watch the tape from start to finish. And I felt a little bit like that was what I was watching. It felt like somebody's VHS of random Bowie clips from when he's been on telly over the last 20 years. And it felt to me like there was very little authorship that I could see on screen. It was Bowie footage presented as Bowie footage without any clever juxtaposition or any new revelations or any surprises. It was a film about David Bowie, for Bowie fans, by a Bowie fan, that shows how great David Bowie was, and that's where the full stop comes. So I was a bit disappointed there wasn't a leaf that was turned over, a rock that was looked under, a new surprise.
Yeah. I would say, unlike your Uncle Kevin's VHS tape, it was highly curated, though. It's like, obviously, he put a lot of time into making it into an artwork, and I think the larger theme for me is that life is a performance, especially for someone like Bowie, who's got all these talents, and he's constantly reinventing himself. There's this existential theme of you're just going to go out and be that personality. If you've got the talent, if you've got the ideas, you just become something, and you just do stuff, and you're just you're living your life kind of as an artwork, a progressive piece of artwork that you just keep changing. But I think Brett Morgan is really, you're right, he's totally focused on a certain era and a certain kind of Bowie, and we see that again and again. And it is largely chronological, but I guess like space, there are these massive holes in it, right? I mean, there are periods you don't mention his first wife, his child, entire decades where there wasn't stuff interesting for Brett Morgan to put in there. So there are some black holes in the film for sure. But Bowie fills them all with his character and some of the various pursuits that he sort of pursued, I guess, the sort of pursuits that he wanted to take on. So we see him as a dancer, we see him as a mime, we see him acting in New York in Elephant Man.
Yeah, that was a revelation, actually. I mean, he seemed great in that, yeah.
We see him as a film actor. there's much to envy. He dances, mimes, paints, sculpts, sings. He travels a lot. He's an actor. He rocks. He writes. He marries a beautiful model. So you end up with this massive case of Bowie envy to a certain extent, because this guy accomplished a lot. He lived a great life, and this sort of celebrates that. But I do agree with you entirely that the depth of David Bowie isn't totally explored. I guess and that's maybe that's the point, is that he had these multiple surfaces, these multiple personalities, and it makes it a little bit harder to get into some of the, I guess, more mundane aspects of his life.
So when you see kind of artists who have many different skills, or who kind of turn themselves to many different outlets, I call this the Michelangelo effect, I think. So, David Bowie, we said, he was good at acting, and the paintings are surprisingly good, and the video art was interesting, and all these different artworks that he turned his hand to, many of them interesting, but I think none of them quite as good as that kind of 1970 to 1980 Bowie live on stage. I feel a little bit like that with Michelangelo. That Michelangelo did all these paintings, and he was a great painter, but he was God's own sculptor. He was the finest sculptor who ever lived, in my humble opinion. And I sort of feel like every day that Michelangelo spent painting is a crime against humanity. It's a waste, because he could have spent that day sculpting, which is the one thing that he was truly better than any other human ever at. And I feel a little bit like, I'm sure David Bowie, had a blast acting in The Elephant Man and appearing in Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, and then going and doing some painting and being a mime. It's all great, well done. But you know what, buddy? Why don't you just stick to the thing that you're really, really good at and explore that to the very greatest depth you can? Because there are some things that you were not just good at, but great at. Why not pour everything you've got into that? And see how high you can take that greatness. That's my attitude. But then that's the attitude of someone who's no good at anything. So it's easy for me to point the bloody finger, isn't it?
Well, I think I guess there's a debate in there about being a generalist versus being a specialist. And I think maybe he could have made more great music if he'd been a specialist in music. He does seem really divided in his attentions, and he seems like he's on this just tear of, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to be successful as this really complete artist who does many different things, but maybe he does spread himself a little too thin. And I think that the film illustrates that, intentionally or not. We go back to him dancing. He's doing some modern dance stuff. It's probably one of his weaker arts, honestly, but we see it a lot, or we see him as miming. He looks like he's definitely doing some film acting, because we see bits of The Man Who Fell to Earth, but we also see these other videos that he may have put together himself. And I agree with you, the talent gets spread a little thin, but he still, lives on as this legend of music. But maybe if he'd just done more music, he would have been even greater,
Oh, I see. Maybe. You saw this at the cinema, yes? Am I right?
I did, yeah.
When I went on a weekday lunchtime, and I was expecting to be pretty much the only person in there, and I wasn't. There were about like 8 or 10 other people in the screening with me. Yeah. But I was probably the youngest of them, I would say.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was walking out behind a lady who was, I would say, in her 60s. She looked like she'd come with her son. So, okay, he was younger than me, but I could hear their conversation, and she was telling her son how much her father had loved David Bowie.
Yeah.
Listening to that conversation made me realise how much this film is aimed at what we in Britain call the grey pound. This is a film for people in their 50s and 60s and older, isn't it? At the very start of the movie, there's a teenager who's crying outside Brixton Academy because she's waiting for David Bowie to come out of the stage door, and he hasn't come out, and she's so upset. She really, really wants to meet him. And I did a little bit of mental arithmetic on the way home and figured out, I think that girl crying outside Brixton Academy is at least 65 now.
Sure.
And that girl is who the film is aimed at. Yeah. This is a film for people in their 60s. Yeah. And I'm quite pleased that someone has realised that there will be enough people in their 60s who want to go and see a film featuring David Bowie, for this to be a film that can have a proper theatrical release. It's actually quite exciting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there were definitely some grey hairs in the theater when we were there. we were a couple of them, but yeah, it was, I love going to stuff like that because it makes me feel younger. You know, you see all these old people and say, yes, I'm younger than they are.
Yeah, I'm down with the old people.
Yeah, it's there's some interesting things though about when we do get a little snippet of his youth. His brother's schizophrenia like clearly frightens him, I think, and it makes him think about mental illness as kind of a lingering threat in his own life potentially.
Yeah.
So he's exploring all these personalities that he wants to explore, and he's also probably hoping that he doesn't have to explore a personality that he doesn't want to face. And I think that was interesting, but coupled with this undercurrent of a theme of being uncomfortable. He says, he doesn't want to be safe. He wants to change his scenery all the time, and this kind of feeds him. He's just feeding on change all the time, and he makes massive changes in his career from one persona to another. So I really liked that part of the film where he was putting himself in situations and doing things where he wasn't as strong. Maybe he's not a strong dancer or a strong actor, but he went out there and did it to become better at it and to sort of tap into creativity as a result of not being comfortable. I liked that theme that came out again and again.
Yeah, yep. And there's a whole bunch of very entertaining highlights in this film. I just made a kind of few little notes here, like those kind of Berlin albums he recorded with Brian Eno. It's fascinating to watch them in the studio, sort of mixing that album. There's a great performance of Heroes,
yes,
which is probably my favorite Bowie song. And there's a great performance in front of an absolutely massive US stadium of Let's Dance, where it really feels like they're playing it at like 1.5 speed. It's a really, really sped up version of Let's Dance.
Yeah, it is very fast. I remember that. Yeah, that's not the album version.
And it's either that someone's told, the license is running out in 5 minutes, so we're going to have to turn the house lights on. So quick, get through the song, quick.
I love the Heroes performance, and I'm a big Adrian Belew fan, and he comes on stage and records with him in Germany on that. So he's the guitarist on that song, and I just love seeing him play together. And that was another thing, is I would have loved to have seen more musicians that he played with over the years, like some of the famous people he recorded with, and it's not that kind of documentary where they're exploring. It's really focused so exclusively on David Bowie that it sort of gives short shrift to a lot of the people who supported him and, wrote songs with John Lennon and just played with Stevie Ray Vaughan. He just recorded with so many people, or the Queen bit, Under Pressure. I mean, just some things that really get overlooked. They're just classics of the entire rock and roll canon, and nothing's made of that. So you don't, as a result, he's out there floating in space in so many different ways. Like he's not in the context of any one decade for very long, so that you get to see how he interacted with other musicians and how he, what his place was in each decade and each era that he passed through.
Listening to you talk about him now, I think we probably must be in the Matrix.
Yeah.
And David Bowie's the guy who won the lottery, didn't he, to get like the best ticket?
Yes.
He's like number one, so he just gets to do all of the things. He won.
Oh man.
I'm sorry to say there was a point during this film where I did pick up my phone and start dialing the Cliche Squad.
Oh,
Cliche Squad.
Can you guess what it was?
Yes, I know exactly what it was. It was escalators and staircases, right?
Oh, interestingly, it wasn't, but you're right. There were a lot of escalators.
He went back to a couple staircases. David Bowie was going up and down escalators a lot. There were empty escalators. There was something about, again, I guess it's this whole space image that the metaphor of him going into space, coming out of space. But that's not the cliche. What's the cliche?
It's just elevators and stairs are a really easy way to film something pretty cinematic, aren't they?
Yeah.
You're exactly right. No, I was going to phone the Cliche Squad because every time a rock star from the 70s or the 80s announces that they are interested in Eastern philosophy and spirituality, that immediately makes me dial the Cliche Squad, I'm afraid. Oh, right. Is that right? Yeah.
You had to have some interest or some trip east during that time, for sure.
Absolutely.
But when he is asked about his religion, he says, I love life. That was it. Which I liked. I mean, I think life is a good thing to worship, and he certainly did, and he sort of led many lives as a result.
He squeezed the most out of his years, didn't he? Absolutely.
Yeah, oh, definitely. So the film that this really reminded me of, and I don't know if you've seen this or not, and our listeners have seen it, but there was a film, I think it was 2003 maybe, called Tarnation. Did you see Tarnation?
I don't think so, but it rings a bell. Carry on.
Yeah, it's a young artsy type, very much like David Bowie, but he'd been recording himself probably on VHS, maybe even 8mm way back when. So he had images of his whole life, and he was sort of a drama type too. So doing theater or just dressing up, and he ends up making this sort of, I don't know, I want to call it an auto documentary or something like that. His mother's schizophrenic. So he's sort of recording her life as well as his own. The guy's name is Jonathan Coet, and he did the whole thing on an iMac, I think. So it's.
I have seen that movie. Yes.
So this film reminded me a lot of that somehow. And there's the schizophrenic connection too of this person who's just, I think deep down, just absolutely paranoid about coming down with any kind of schizophrenia or mental illness whatsoever. And then as a result, also documenting their own life and just living this completely artistic life where they're allowed to almost safely explore multiple personalities, as opposed to someone who's close to them having to struggle with a multiple personality disorder or some sort of schizophrenia or just some sort of lack of being tethered to reality. And the film really reminded me, and also in the editing style, I felt very reminded of Tarnation.
I remember now that I was sent to see Tarnation when I was doing film reviews for Film Exposed, the website. And they sent me to see this movie, and I wrote in my review that because the guy who'd made it had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, I wrote that the act of going to see the movie was like literally making his personality disorder worse. And so by attending the film at all, you were contributing to his mental illness.
Yeah, there's maybe a little bit of that in there too.
Yeah, I didn't like that film. But that guy's doing pretty well if he's getting compared to David Bowie.
Well, on this very modest podcast, yes. But it was more of a reminder, and not necessarily a positive reminder, maybe not a negative reminder, but definitely the two films had some similarities and some connective tissue, I thought. So
I've got one last question for you,
go ahead.
Which is, when you went to see it, did they play the music loud in your screening?
It was pretty loud, and we sat very close to the front, so most of the speakers at the front in that theater, I believe. A friend of mine had texted me the trailer, I think, and he'd seen it in an IMAX theater very loud, and that may have made a difference. I think maybe the performances would have stood out more, but I think there's still some spaces in there that are a little bit empty for me, so I don't know that I would want to see a lot of the rest of the film on an IMAX screen with super high volume. But how about for you? Did you get like a concert experience out of it?
No, I was disappointingly quiet, actually. I was kind of reminded a little bit when I went to see Purple Rain when it was released in the cinema back in sort of 85 or something like that. And there the projectionist must have been a really big Prince fan because it was cranked up incredibly loud. My ears were ringing as I came out of the cinema. That was fantastic. And I was expecting something a little bit like this, but no, a polite afternoon screening in Wimbledon meant that they kept the volume down.
Oh, so proper. Yeah, it's not a concert film, so I guess that doesn't make sense. And it's oddly, it's kind of a visual experimentation film. It's not really that kind of documentary where there's a lot of concert footage and it's super loud. There's definitely some good stuff. The Heroes moment is fantastic. Let's Dance is bizarre because it's just a big show, and you're right, it's so fast compared to the album version.
Well, speaking of visual experiences, let's have a break, and we will move on to our other David Bowie film, which we've just watched a bit of in Moonage Daydream. So let's have a break, and we'll come back and talk about The Man Who Fell.
We have all heard more than enough about erectile dysfunction. But what about...
Speak for yourself.
But what about, Jimmy, what about erectile hyperfunk? Beep, beep, beep. We interrupt this fake advertisement to bring you a different fake advertisement. Jimmy, it was a very tough Saturday for me.
Right. Okay. Tough meaning hard?
Very difficult. Yeah, I had this long to-do list with various chores around the house.
Something long, was it? Yeah?
Yep.
Long? Something long to do.
Well, it's a long list to get through and not much time to do all the things on it. And of course, I ended up doing battle with a number of products that didn't pass the grandma test. Do you know the grandma test?
I'm not sure I do know the grandma test.
For me, maybe it's just a family expression or something. If a company makes a product that your grandmother can't assemble, maintain, or repair easily without a lot of fancy tools, muscle, or frustration, then they need to redesign the product.
So you're talking about every car ever manufactured then?
Thank you for starting with the car. I had to change this light bulb in a Subaru headlight. Super hard to get at, plenty of breakable plastic, and you need a surprising amount of strength in very small, nimble fingers to do the job. That doesn't pass the grandma test. Then I literally brought out my sewing needle kit to fish window blind cord through a pinhole of a piece of tiny plastic, all because of a child's safety feature that assures that the cord is designed to break. And again, tiny working fingers and very good eyesight. There are no grandmas with really good eyesight, right? Well, yeah. Well, but here you go. That's a product that needs child-proofing, but it makes it granny-proof too, right? Okay, lastly, I come home. I'm helping my wife. She's assembling a piece of metal furniture with no instructions. You've seen this. Stuff just has pictures and letters now, and you're supposed to put it all together.
Right.
So this piece of crap was so hastily made that the telescoping metal parts weren't the right size, and they had to be forced into place with a rubber hammer. It was hammer time again around the house.
Hammer time.
So grandma has to have muscles. It's noisy, so you better hope your grandmother's deaf to do that job. And it's frustrating. If she has a pacemaker or high blood pressure, it might be no more grandma, right? So none of these products pass the grandma test. They just don't work.
Is it possible you're overworking your grandmother?
Possibly, yeah.
Let the poor woman have a break.
Gives me a break, right? Do you know what does work?
What does work?
The internet.
Speak for yourself.
And you know what else works?
What else works?
Apple computers. Holy shit. I just got a new MacBook Pro, and my grandmother, who has been dead for 42 years, she could have set it up. It was so easy.
They know what they're doing, don't they?
Those guys have in-house grandma testing. I think they've got grandmothers in their laboratories testing their products. So, all this to say that there's something else that works. It's called grannytests.com. You can research projects that do pass the grandma test. Granny Test has done the research for you. I've used it in the past, and here's how it works. Send your troublesome products to their laboratories, where they have a team of decrepit nonagenarians that will test them to determine if they work or not, and then they list them on their website with a rating of how many grannies it takes to assemble, maintain, or repair. So, for example, half a granny or one granny, you're good to go. 2 grannies means purchase at your own risk. And a horizontal granny in the coffin means don't buy the piece of crap in the first place unless you're the kind of misanthrope who wants to kill your grandmother. Sadly, in this day and age, nothing I have ever sent to the laboratories has ever been returned to me. So I'm spending a lot on shipping. I'm not getting any refunds, but I've been assured that they sell unusable goods to raise money for charity or for Granny's personal gain. And I, Jimmy, get the satisfaction and peace of mind knowing anyone who uses the website won't make the same mistakes I did. So, be a good little muffin. Listen and learn from the elderly. Try grannytests.com. That's GRANNYTESS.com. If Granny can't do it, then no one should have to go through it.
Oh, that's good. And we are back after I've just spent half an hour searching for grannytest.com. Apparently it doesn't exist. I don't believe it. I can't believe it.
Go figure.
I've been lied to. So we're going to talk about our well, I say other David Bowie movie of the night, but yeah, it does feature quite heavily in the first David Bowie movie of the night. So 1.5 movies
Yeah.
at the Two Real Cinema Club, the 1.5 Real Cinema Club. This week, this is The Man Who Fell to Earth from 1976. Now, I had never seen this before, apart from a small little clip. I turned on the television when I was a teenager, I think, and it must have been on the BBC late at night on a Saturday night, and I saw just a very, very short, brief little bit of this movie, and I will tell you which brief little bit I saw when we come to it, because it's utterly pivotal and completely informed my view of the film just from seeing these 30 seconds. So, written by Paul Meyersburg, who's a British movie critic. Oh. He also went on to write Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. He wrote Croupier. I don't know if you've seen that, which is the Clive Owen breakthrough movie from 1998. So he's done a bunch of different things. But I think this was the first kind of major picture that he wrote, directed by Nicholas Roeg, British director. So he directed Performance and Walkabout before this, and then did Don't Look Now before this.
Thanks for mentioning Walkabout, because that is one of my absolute all-time favorite films. And then every other Nicholas Roeg film I really have a hard time with. So that's and I just always have to remember, he did Walkabout. He did Walkabout.
What do you not like? Don't Look Now.
That's a really weird film. That's the Donald Sutherland film, right?
Donald Sutherland, Julie Christie, Julie Christie,
that's
wandering
right.
around Venice.
I did see that in London when I was living there, and it kind of freaked me out, and it just wasn't. I like weird, I like weird, but it just wasn't the right weird for me somehow. And we just talked about Insignificance a couple weeks ago, and now this one, and but I mean, Walkabout. It's funny. I think it might be his first feature film, or certainly among his first. It's like 1971. I think it was his second feature,
a year after Performance.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And Performance, that's the Andy Warhol film, right?
And I think it's
about Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol might be in it. It's definitely Mick Jagger. And one of the Fox brothers. Okay, Edward Fox, right. I think.
I should go back and see that. But Walkabout, I adore that film. I think it's incredible. And then I don't think this one's incredible, but I'm not going to tell you what my favorite scene is or any of the scenes that I remember, but I'm going to just let you go on.
Also, it's based on a novel by Walter Tevis, who I hadn't heard of before, but this is the guy who wrote 6 novels, and 3 of them became major motion pictures. Wow. So this, The Man Who Fell to Earth, and The Hustler, and The Colour of Money. Were all written by Walter Tevis, all turned into significant pictures. And he also wrote the book The Queen's Gambit, turned into a series by Netflix last year or so.
Which is awesome.
So incredible hit rate, really, for this guy. So The Man Who Fell to Earth, surprise, surprise, you can tell from the title, science fiction picture. So it opens with a spaceship crash. There's a kind of a bit of a montage of newsreel footage of spaceships breaking up in the atmosphere. There's a big splashdown in a lake in New Mexico, and then the next thing we see is David Bowie. He's wearing a long brown coat and he's slipping down a gravel hill. He's trying to get to grips with humans and the Earth's gravity. Yeah. Eventually, he finds his way to a pawn shop where he produces a ring, and it turns out he is English. He speaks with an English accent. He's got an English passport, a British passport. He pawns this ring, and then one of the nicer gags in the movie, after he leaves the shop, he pulls out of his pocket a chain of like 200 of these identical gold rings, and this is the currency that he's brought from his alien planet down to Earth. So we get a bit of a flashback about David Bowie. His character's called Thomas Jerome Newton. He's chosen a name after eminent scientist. So he comes from an alien world which is dying. It's a desert world. It's arid, and he's like on a last-ditch mission to try and save his family and save his people. So he's come to the Earth. He gathers together a bit of cash by selling these gold rings, and the first thing he does is he goes to see Oliver Farnsworth, who's a patent lawyer with the thickest glasses I have seen in years. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. He's got 2 massive magnifying glasses balanced on his face. He hands over a big envelope full of money, and he says, "Look, I'm just buying a few hours of your time. please have a look at these sheets of paper. And Farnsworth tells him, well, you have 9 basic patents here. Now, I am not a patent lawyer, but I can tell from the way he says this that this is pretty significant. And the guy says, oh, this is probably worth at least $300 million. So Newton ends up setting up an enormous tech empire. He stays in the shadows. He gets Farnsworth to run it. And he's built this enormous empire out of his patents, which allow him to produce things like self-developing film, isn't it? And a whole new way of listening to music that's a little bit like, imagine someone got a compact disc and then they scrunched it up into a tiny little ball. That's what his kind of music player looks like. But the big idea is that he's going to build a spaceship to return to his own planet and presumably take most of the water with him. So he goes to New Mexico, where he's going to set up this spaceship building enterprise, and there he meets Mary Lou. And I think this is basically the start of Act 2. So we've had Act 1 up until now, setting up Newton as this kind of crazy alien guy, and then he meets Mary Lou. So she works in the motel where he stays, and they just have an instant connection. And she likes to hang out with him, and she recognises that he's kind of strange and alien and bizarre, but he's English, so of course he's going to be strange and alien and bizarre, because that's what we're like. Now, meanwhile, Rip Torn is also in the film as Bryce. He's a chemistry professor. He's spending a lot of time sleeping with his students. Yeah. In what is a slightly uncomfortable sort of middle-aged man fantasy part of the film. So he gets a job with Newton's company, World Enterprises, as a chemist. I think he's going to develop the rocket fuel that's going to get Newton back to his home planet. And so Bryce and Newton, they kind of become confidants and friends. But Bryce is always a bit suspicious. There's something a bit weird and off about Newton. So he takes an X-ray. It's like a secret X-ray picture of him. Yeah. Which is this like fantastic thing produced by the art department of, it's like a cutout outline of David Bowie sitting in a chair. And utterly unlike any X-ray I've ever seen. But apparently this means that he rumbles David Bowie. He figures out that Newton is an alien. Yeah. And sort of confronts him with it. But Newton is, in the meanwhile, is kind of his whole life is sort of falling apart. He sits at home all day. He watches many TVs at the same time, and he drinks booze. Yeah. And his relationship with Mary Lou is breaking down, and she's kind of been his sort of anchor point. And I think this is what you would call the midpoint of the movie, where their great relationship then kind of turns sour. I just figured he's sort of doing the 1970s equivalent of doom scrolling, isn't it? He's got like a drink in one hand, and instead of flicking through Instagram, as fast as his thumb will take him, he's watching like multiple programs on lots of different televisions. It's like the closest he could get in 1973.
Do you know why he was watching all the televisions? I couldn't quite make that out. It seemed like he was, I don't know if he was trying to play the stock market. He was trying to figure out what was selling, what was working in the United States to make him a lot of money.
I sort of thought he was trying to assimilate human culture at 10 times normal speed. Sure. That was my guess, but I could be wrong. Because
a lot is made of that, because it seems like in the first hotel room he's got lots of televisions, and then later on when he's sequestered or something like that, he's got a lot of televisions as well. So it seems to be super important, but the point was not really clear to me, other than he's just bored, or maybe you're right, he was just trying to assimilate and learn American culture.
I mean, I wonder whether the notion of having multiple televisions in your house seemed utterly insane back in 1976. Whereas these days, we're all used to watching YouTube videos at 1.5 speed, while also playing a video game and listening to a podcast at the same time. It's kind of become we're all the man who fell to earth now.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I have a number of households in my hometown. We had 2 televisions, one on top of the other, because one inevitably wouldn't work, or would get some stations, and another would get the other stations, or the sound would go out on one, so we'd have to use the sound from one television and the image of another, and it was just a sign of the times, I'm afraid.
So like the whole issue about Newton's relation with Mary Lou breaking down is what precipitates the one scene that I had seen as a teenager, which is that he decides he'll reveal himself to Mary Lou. Mm-hmm. So he goes into the bathroom, and he removes his contact lenses. Mm-hmm. And underneath those, he's got these kind of strange yellow snake-like eyes. Yeah. And he kind of he sort of takes off his wig and and kind of he emerges as this kind of strange semi-reptilian
Yeah.
alien, and Mary Lewis, so incredibly freaked out by this that she pees herself.
Yep.
Like in close up, right on screen, right there, kind of like 6 inches from your face. And that was the moment that I saw as a teenager. That was my only experience of this whole movie.
Oh, wow.
Like this 30-second snippet of David Bowie wearing crazy contact lenses, and then a woman urinating.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the only thing I knew about this film for many, many years. And that was enough to put me off trying to go and see it again. I thought, well, this is entertainment. What the hell do they put on BBC Two at late at night?
Was that a trailer or just sort of like a preview for?
No, that was flicking through the channels.
Oh, wow.
And that was back in a time when there were only 4 channels. So it's not like I could doom scroll through 200 channels.
You struck gold with that scene. Oh boy.
Well, yeah, the wrong kind of gold, I think. Exactly. Yes. So eventually, Newton builds his spaceship, and on the eve of the launch, when he's about to be blasted off into space, he is kidnapped by the government.
Yep.
So the government basically they take his companies and they take his research, and they lock him up and experiment on him. So now Bernie Casey is like is the government guy who now suddenly just steps in and controls all of Newton's assets. There's a kind of very peculiar scene where he is swimming naked in a pool. There is a lot of nudity in this film.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, and he climbs naked out of the pool, and his wife is standing naked next to the pool, and he gives her a hug. And I didn't really understand what any of that was about, apart from maybe it was just to show that not only had they stolen his inventions and his spaceship, but also they had so much water that they could just splash about in it without caring. And I'm guessing that's what it was about, but it was also an excuse to get a lot of flesh on screen.
Yeah.
So Newton is taken off to this kind of strange hotel suite where he's experimented on with some pretty random experiments. There's an accident with some x-rays, so the lenses that he wears to disguise his eyes get fused to his eyeballs so he can never take them off. And eventually, many, many years later, Newton appears the same age, but Mary Lou is much older.
Yeah.
She comes and finds him. She gets into his hotel room, tracks him down. They have quite disturbing sex with a revolver firing blanks at each other.
Yep.
And then after that, he escapes and he becomes a pop star. Much like David Bowie.
Oh, go figure.
And his intention is he records some songs because he knows that they will be broadcast by the radio, and that's his only hope of communicating with his estranged family back on his dying world. And the movie ends.
Oh, quite suddenly at that, right?
It does end, doesn't it? Quite suddenly. So I think like the third act is basically it's David Bowie being experimented on and prodded and poked and injected. Then he escapes, becomes a pop star, credits roll. It all happens really pretty quickly.
Yeah,
and that is The Man Who Fell to Earth.
Yeah.
So had you seen it before this time round?
I thought I had, and either it was so long ago that I've just forgotten everything, or maybe I've blanked it out, or it's possible that I just never saw it, period. But it felt familiar because I know that I'd seen either trailers for it or posters of it. And again, having seen it in Moonage Daydream, it may have been just that I'd seen it a week or two before, and then I saw it again in its entirety. So I hadn't ever seen it, no. And it was complicated for me. I describe this as a very drifty film. There seems to be a lot of just kind of story wandering. There's random sort of order of events. It sort of cuts through time in a strange way because Rip Torn's character and Mary Lou end up together later on, and they're gray-haired, and from that she goes back to Bowie's character, who's sometimes called Tommy, sometimes Newton. At one point, I think he's Mr. Sussex too, or something like that. It was it was drifty. It was just like nothing really stuck on the wall. It's just throwing things into the camera. A lot of it also seemed to be cut in the camera, if you know what I mean. Like that Rogue was he was kind of leaving very few editorial choices because there just wasn't coverage for certain scenes, and he was just sort of piecing it together as if it were, as if it had some kind of continuity when it didn't. So it was a hard kind of film for me to follow, and you picked up on a lot of things that kind of just, they didn't, I know that I saw them, but they didn't stick to me. Like,
Nick Rogue, he does love a zoom lens, doesn't he, Nick Rogue? There's a lot of scenes in this movie where the camera just very slowly zooms in or it zooms out.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how he's doing his editing in camera, isn't it?
Yeah, it does, and it doesn't leave. I don't know if he edited this film or not, but it doesn't leave your editor much room to like piece together a story where there wasn't one or strengthen a story. Is it Nathaniel Bryce, the Rip Torn character? He had a job. It wasn't really clear to me what his job was. It wasn't really that clear what Mary Lou and Miss Newton, David Bowie's character, what their relationship really was all about. Like, yes, she saved him in a hotel at one point. He seemed to be passing out because of the conditions, and she's a hotel worker, and all of a sudden they're living in the hotel together. Very odd. It jumps around. So I call it a drifty film. It was very, very inconsistent, I guess. So it made it difficult to.
There's a lot of like narrative gaps, aren't there?
Yeah.
I mean, we go from, I appreciated quite early on that there's no attempt to explain how David Bowie's character is able to speak English and how he understands what a pawn shop is and how he has a good idea of what a gold ring would be worth. He seems to understand humanity sort of surprisingly intimately for someone who is, a total stranger. Yeah. But then I was prepared to blip over that because I thought, well, maybe this is the impression of humankind that you would get, or the information that you would gather from watching 50 years of television broadcasts. Yeah. That actually, he's learned about the Earth in this kind of distant way, like reading a phrase book and a guidebook at great length over 50 years. So I was kind of prepared to accept that. And again, some of the narrative jumps about, it doesn't explain how he got out of the capsule and where did he get his clothes from and how come he's kind of slip sliding down a gravel hill at the first time we see him. Yeah. And I felt like those things kind of didn't matter. I was fairly happy with these kind of big story gaps because I quite enjoyed the impressionistic storytelling. I'll tell you another thing that Nick Rogue likes as well as a zoom lens. He really does like people having sex in hotels.
Ooh, yeah.
That was a big feature in Insignificance. It's a big feature in Don't Look Now. It's a big feature in this film as well. There's an awful lot of people having sex in hotels. Yeah. In these films, it's a really a much favoured theme.
The sex in this film is really weird though too. Like you mentioned the scene with the gun firing blanks at each other. That was disturbing.
I found that very hard to watch.
But Rip Torn, he's having sex with multiple students.
And they're kind of cross-cut, aren't they, these scenes? Yeah.
And it's kind of odd sex. It's really weird. There's one scene where one of his students tries to. It seems, I don't know if it's like it's a violent thing. I don't know if it was a rape scenario or something like that. But she attacks him or something like that, and then eventually you realize, it's some sort of sex game where she's trying to break into his apartment and scare him, and it ends up that they know each other, and that Bowie, for some reason, Bowie's character can. His own thinking gets interrupted by these visions of Bryce having sex. I couldn't figure that out at all. Like there's this intercutting between Bowie in a coffee shop watching a performance or something like that, and then Rip Torn having sex with undergrads on his campus, and it's almost as if those thoughts are interfering with Bowie's thinking. It was very odd.
But he has this way of seeing through time, hasn't he? Because there's a strange scene where they're driving through the Midwest. It's like New Mexico scenery or whatever, and David Bowie is able to see settlers from 100 years previously.
That's right, yeah.
And then the settlers also kind of see David Bowie as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's strange and unexplained and mysterious.
Yeah, and he doesn't age through the film, as you mentioned, but other characters are aging, and I guess, from an alien perspective, that might make some sense, but for an Earthling like me watching the film, it didn't.
It reminded me a little bit of a comment I remember a friend of mine made when we were at school, when we were talking about Star Trek, and he observes that the one great thing, the big advantage Star Trek had over all other science fiction shows was that other science fiction programs would have someone with makeup or a bit of plastic on their face to be the aliens, whereas Star Trek had managed to find an actual alien to appear as one of the characters in the show, because Leonard Nimoy was just so utterly sort of otherworldly. Yeah. And I felt very similarly about David Bowie. I think it's inspired casting as an alien because he really does seem tremendously alien. Yeah. And in fact, this notion that his genuine alien nature is revealed by him taking some contact lenses off, or in the real world, putting some contact lenses in,
Yeah.
feels almost the wrong way round, because David Bowie's eyes so distinctive and unusual looking.
Yeah.
That you don't really need to interfere with his eyes to make him look alien.
No.
That's part of what makes him look so peculiar.
Yeah, it really plays into the whole the Brett Morgan vision of Bowie as an alien as well. And I think
Yeah,
he's very well
absolutely.
cast, and he actually acts quite well. I mean, it's a good part for him, and he plays it very well.
I did read a little interview about the making of the film, where Bowie
Okay.
was saying that basically in this film, it was like his first proper acting gig, and he was not acting. He said he was just kind of existing and taking a lot of cocaine, apparently.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I don't think he was thinking about character. He would claim that he hadn't really done any preparation or anything like that. He was just saying the lines in the way that seemed appropriate to him at the time. And yet this kind of off-kilter, strange, otherworldly performance is exactly what the film needs. I think it does show that 60% of the battle is the casting, and they won that 60% fair and square for this film.
Yeah, I think another thing that this film needs, there was a lot of stuff that wasn't in there that I would have liked, that I wanted. Like there's not really enough on his home planet, I don't think, and his family, which seems like a really interesting world. And as you said, it's implied that he was able to sort of study up on Earth, but we don't really see any of that.
And all they have is like this weird shed on rails with a sort of a sail over it, isn't it?
Oh my God, I loved that. It looked like a gingerbread house on like a train made of gingerbread, and I thought, Jesus, if you can't get food or water, just start eating the gingerbread train. You can survive.
So they're all dying because their tongues were so dry.
Yeah.
Gingerbread. Oh, I've got nothing to wash it down with. Help.
Which reminds me of the milk scene too. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I think that I love the costumes on there. They're sort of in these sort of I don't know, glassy dome helmets, and they've got all these tubes giving them, I don't know, what little water they can condense and air to breathe. I love that, and I think they do show us a little bit of that planet, but I think I needed a little bit more. And I don't promote a lot of flashbacks in films, but I think something more would have been good sustenance, because otherwise, as I said, it's drifty. It sort of goes from one thing to another, and neither world is really particularly well drawn in my mind. Like the Earth as it is in the 1970s or whatever era it's supposed to take place, it was a little unclear, and you add all the time jumping in there, and it makes for kind of a confusing thing, and again a drifty film to follow. And okay, so the other weird sex scene I thought was Mary Lou. There's this milk thing, right? He's with her. I think it's the chocolate chip cookie moment, not the gun moment. But there's this love scene where there's a milk sex thing going on the planet that he's sort of experiencing that too, or sex with Mary Lou reminds him of the milk sex on his planet. Am I way off base here?
I didn't see it as milk sex, but I know exactly what you're talking about. It looked more to me like it was trampoline sex.
Okay.
While some grips threw buckets of emulsion in the air, I think.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, that's how sex works on the alien planet.
I thought it was a milk and cookies thing. I saw the chocolate chip cookie, and I saw the milk sex on the other planet. Oh my God. It was fun to watch. I gotta say, not that scene necessarily, but the film.
The film knows what its themes are, and explores them, I think, pretty well. I think I came away feeling that what it wanted to try and express was that human love, is alien and strange. I think the film is all about this kind of this attitude towards love and the way that love is expressed. I mean, the mere fact that when he comes down, his currency is wedding rings.
Yeah.
I think, and it's all about his family, which he is estranged from.
Mm-hmm.
And Bryce and Newton, they're kind of the same because they're both brilliant, and they're both estranged from their family. They're both kind of isolated and lonely. And there's kind of Farnsworth lives with his kind of sort of his lover.
Yeah.
And that's like another important theme. Their kind of sort of togetherness.
Yeah.
And when the government comes in and murders Farnsworth to take over the business, they murder the lover as well, don't they?
Yeah.
And the fact that the most important person in his life, when he comes down to the Earth, is Mary Lou, who's just like a woman who works in a hotel.
Yeah.
That it's not that he hasn't done the alien thing of descending to the planet and saying, "Take me to your leader."
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Take me to your chambermaid." It's it's a little bit of closeness to a real person, and she takes him to church, doesn't she? And
Yeah, that's right.
introduces him to kind of booze and TV and things, and it's like this, the little things of life. It's absolutely about meditation on love and how strange it can be.
That's good.
I wrote down there are a couple of sort of sub themes that I identified. I think it's trying to say that corporate power is not the answer. It seems very quaint in 2022 to watch a film where the government is more powerful than a corporation.
Yeah.
Because that's utterly the opposite to what we live in now, isn't it? These days, corporations. It's like we live in a dystopia. The corporations really are the most powerful bodies. David Bowie in this film is kind of playing Elon Musk, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's a guy with a whole bunch of technology patents. He wants to build a rocket. I mean, it's absolutely Elon Musk. In a way, I felt the film was kind of trying to extol the virtues of Randian exceptionalism. It's a little bit of that sort of Ayn Rand, great people should be allowed to do great things without interference from the little people. So there is a bit of an element of that.
Yeah,
but then
you've done some good digging there. I agree with you. I don't know that any one of them is that strong. It's almost like the documentary where things are spread a little thin, so nothing really sinks in forcefully. Because there's also this whole environmental degradation piece of his planet and then coming to the Earth to try and solve that problem. It's puzzling, yeah.
I must say, I think I enjoyed the movie a lot more than you did. It sounds like
probably.
I enjoyed it.
I think. What I appreciate is that Nick Rogue, he's trying, he's playing, it's experimental, but he never settles on any one of those themes or the story really with a lot of commitment, I thought. So I think as a result of succeeding in delivering one theme or one really strong storyline, it's sort of just he doesn't really succeed to my grading anywhere. So that's what made it odd to me. And then I also thought there were some moments that were like clearly comic or supposed to be comic, and I didn't feel like this was a comedy by any means, but
I'm not sure I can remember a single comic moment. What were the comic moments? Can you remember any?
Well, God, the gingerbread train, I just thought they don't. They're not serious about this. And then others, I couldn't figure out like the relationship between Buck Henry, who plays Farnsworth, and his lover. It was they had such an odd life, and the glasses, like the big glasses. What was it all about? I couldn't figure out. You're not necessarily supposed to take seriously someone who's got like trifocals and just enormous bug-eye glasses, and they have all these different eyeballs as a result. They were just so yeah. I think in both, or when David Bowie is showing Nathaniel Bryce they're in like a lighthouse or something, some sort of tower, and he's got this energy source, right? And he's talking about using that to, I think, go to space, and that's where he comes on with his chemistry. That was just odd scenes that I don't know if they were supposed to be absurdly comic or just straight up slapstick almost at times. So it was strange to know where this film was coming from and where it was going, I guess.
I wanted to try and do kind of like a bit of a synthesis of trying to bring the two films together. It does feel like we're getting two different bites at the David Bowie cherry. That's a really stupid. I regret saying that already. That's a ridiculous image. But I must say I came away from The Man Who Fell to Earth feeling like I had got a deeper, more honest insight into David Bowie, the man from The Man Who Fell to Earth, than I did from Moonage Daydream. I think partly because there's just an awful lot more nudity in The Man Who Fell to Earth. So I have had a number of close-ups of David Bowie's butt crack, and so I feel like yes, actually, that aspect of him I do know intimately now, probably more intimately than I wanted to. But also, in a way, I feel like there is less acting from David Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth than there is in Moonage Daydream. I think in The Man Who Fell to Earth, I feel it's almost a more honest, straightforward, unmediated presentation of a man who is kind of otherworldly and a little bit lost, and not hiding behind, the Thin White Duke or the kind of the Ziggy Stardust or any of these personas that he created for himself. I feel like I can see more of the David Bowie who's the child in those photographs that we see with his parents in Moonage Daydream in The Man Who Fell to Earth. I just think it strikes me that this is a pretty honest psychological portrait of the man himself.
Isn't that's massively ironic too? I think you've got a good point there. Like, he's most consistent in The Man Who Fell to Earth. You see one Bowie.
Yep.
And you see that one Bowie very completely. Whereas in Moonage Daydream, you see a number of Bowies, and you like most of them. You admire all those Bowies, but you never get a true feeling of one rounded out Bowie, I guess.
Was there one Bowie? Was there ever one Bowie?
I don't think there ever was. Well, maybe this is the one moment. The Man Who Fell to Earth was the one Bowie.
Right. So, okay. I enjoyed both those films. That was good. I think we have just got time for also playing at this theatre. Seen anything else good last couple of weeks since last time we spoke?
I don't think so. No, I'm trying to think of
nothing. So that's it, folks. Thanks and good night.
Well, I can't think of it. I'm hoping to go see a film tonight called Tuba to Cuba. I think it is Tuba to Cuba.
Right.
It's about the Preservation Hall jazz band from New Orleans, and they make a trip to Cuba to jam with Cuban musicians down there, and it looks like it's going to be great music, so it should be loud and good music on film. So I think it brings together some things I'm really interested in. So I'm hoping to see that tonight.
Well, only other movie that we have seen in our house, apart from these David Bowie epics, is Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Oh.
Which is on a Saturday night. We needed to watch something that was family friendly. And I was surprised to see Chloe Grace Moretz in a really early role in that movie. It's a pretty straightforward kind of middle school comedy, which my son guffawed at. So it had exactly the required effect, and he laughed his head off.
Oh, brilliant!
And when he laughs, I laugh. So that was a good way to spend an evening. I was happy with that.
Well chosen then. And that's probably what, is that 5-10 years old by now? I know the book came out.
Probably 10 or 15 years old, I would guess.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up.
Precisely. Oh, good. So
this has been the Two Real Cinema Club. I feel like we've explored space and time.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted.
What shall we do next, though? What will we do in our next program?
Well, next time around, I think we're going to watch All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a new Netflix version, which is coming out in a couple of weeks. So we're going to watch that. So if you want to watch along with us, if you want to avoid the spoilers by getting in on the film before us, then watch that. And we're going to try and compare it to which Kubrick film have we chosen?
Full Metal Jacket. 1980, 86, somewhere in there?
Yeah, something like that, wasn't it? Amongst 5 or 10 other Vietnam movies, which all came out that year, and I have no idea why. So pretty exciting, actually.
Yeah.
I know one of those is going to be absolutely spectacularly good.
Yes.
So join us next time. And we've got a popcorn counter before that. So I hope you'll come and join us at the popcorn counter next week. And we'll see you next time. Thanks. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.